In this movie, we're going to correct an image by following the proper color correction workflow by using the three-way color corrector. So I have our shot here of Felicia, and we need to correct it. And we've already determined with our eyes what generally needs to happen. Now we just need to execute. So to start out, we need to get the interface set up appropriately, and that means we need a space to display our video scopes. To do that, I'm going to come up to Window and Reference Monitor. Now, instead of this being a floating window, I'm going to dock it to my interface. So I'm just going to drag this little part right here. Notice that I can put it anywhere that highlights here. I'm just going to put it right here. I'm also going to drag like so that it looks generally like this. Now, right now, it's displaying just my video output. And as I scrub through the program monitor, the reference monitor is ganged to it. That's because I have Gang to Program Monitor checked. If I uncheck that and then scrub through, you can see that it's not linked. So occasionally you might just want a reference image here, but for our purposes, we do want that ganged. And then what I actually want to do with the reference monitor is instead of showing this image, I want to show my video scopes so that we can properly measure our video signal. So I'm just going to come up to this drop-down menu here, and you can choose any of these video scopes, but the one that we're going to start off with is the YC waveform. Y stands for luma, which is your light and dark values, and C stands for chroma, which are your color values. You can display this without the chroma, which we are going to start with, so I'm going to uncheck chroma. And now this green trace just represents my light and dark values. All right, so the first step in our color correction workflow is to adjust our blacks and whites. If we take a look at our Y waveform, black is right here at 0, and white is up here at 100. So already we can see that the blacks are not black enough and the whites are not white enough. And we already knew that from just looking with our eyes. By the way, this little setup checkbox limits blacks to 7.5 instead of 0. That's an analog workflow, so I'm going to uncheck that so that we can actually go all the way down to 0 because this is digital. So without further ado, let's go ahead and apply the three-way color corrector effect to our image. I'm going to go ahead and just drag that on. And while I'm at it, I'll go ahead and drag it to the other one as well because we're going to go through the workflow with Anita as well. And I'll go ahead and click on this and click on my effect controls. And I'm going to come down to input levels. So I'm just going to set my black level first by grabbing onto this slider here and moving it so that the darkest parts of my image are approaching 0. By the way, the darkest parts of my image, you can see here that this sign is probably right here. We have kind of the shadows within Felicia's hair over here, and we have this person's shirt over here. So we're looking left to right here, and we're looking left to right here. Then I'm going to take my white point and drag it to the left until the lightest parts of the image are approaching 100. Notice that when I adjusted my white point, the blacks rose above 0 just a little bit, so it's a little bit of a dance. While this is mostly adjusting just the lightest parts of the image, it does pull at the darkest parts just a little bit, so I'm going to come back in and fix that. We also have our midtone control, which allows us to brighten or darken the image like so. This is a little bit more subjective. Once you set your blacks and whites, you can kind of lighten things up or darken things up accordingly. And I think I'm just going to lighten things up just a bit. Again, I just want to remind you that under auto levels, you are able to set this with these little eyedroppers. You can pick something that's black and something that's white, and it usually gets you pretty close. But if you watched the last movie, you saw that it made the image a little bit too contrasty, so you're going to need to use these manual controls anyway in most cases. So I like this contrast. If I want to see the before and after, again, I just come up to this little effects icon and toggle, and already you can see that things are much improved. So again, setting your blacks and whites is step 1. Step 2 is to focus on the colors and remove any color cast. Now, when we looked at this with our eyes, we really didn't think that this image had a huge color cast, but let's verify that. So I'm going to switch from the Y waveform to the RGB parade, and this shows us a breakdown of our red, green, and blue color channels. If I show you the before, you can see that each of the channels is relatively in line with one another, and then I can show you the after, and you can see that basically they still are. You can always check for sure by taking your little eyedroppers here and sampling. So I would just take my shadows eyedropper and sample something that is black, and my highlights eyedropper and sample something that is white. If there's a color cast in either of those values, then these color wheels are going to adjust accordingly. As you can see, the pucks in the middle really did not adjust too much, so we verified that there is not too much of a color cast here. So we're in good shape in that regard. All right, so we've corrected our contrast by mapping our blacks and whites. We've made sure that the image is balanced. Now it's time to move on to step 3, where we adjust the image's hue and saturation values. I'm going to switch to the vector scope. This video scope measures just chroma, or color values. It measures no luma. And specifically, we're looking at a replica of the color wheel. So we've got red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, and yellow. Values close to the middle of the vector scope are not saturated at all, whereas values close to the outside of this circle are very saturated. I can show you this by coming to my master saturation, for example, and increasing this. You can see that it grows from the center. I'll reset that. All right, so you can see that the vector scope shows us that our image is weighted towards the yellows and oranges, and that's good. This line here is called the flesh tone line, and you want the flesh tones to reside along it. You should also aim for the trace, which is this green clump, to go out about 1/4 to 1/3 of the way from the center of the circle. That's when we're looking at human faces, okay? So this is telling us that this image is not very saturated, which again we deduced with our eyes. So I'm okay on the actual color. We're residing right along the flesh tone line here. If we weren't, we could come up to our mid-tone chroma wheel and adjust accordingly. You can kind of see that that changes, but I'm going to reset that because I think we're okay basically on our flesh tones, but what we're lacking in is saturation. So I'm going to come down here to saturation and start working these sliders until we've got a good saturation, which again is about right here. I'll just start with master saturation, and that's looking good. I think I'm just going to bump up shadow saturation as well. You can see that she's looking a lot healthier now, and I really like that for her flesh tones. The vector scope looks good as well. I'm going to just come up here to my before and after. Here's before, here's after. She looks alive, well, and healthy. I think we've done a good job. Now I'm going to go through this whole process again on a different image, but I want to go through it quite fast so you can see the process happen in real time. So I'm going to go to Anita, and I'm going to go back to my Y waveform. So it's the Y waveform because I am not showing chroma. And I'm going to come down to my input levels, and we're going to set our blacks. And we'll set our whites. And go back and make sure that our blacks are black. And I think I'll bring my midtones just a little bit below the midpoint. And next, I'm going to go to the RGB parade. And let's start off by just sampling my shadows. Go ahead and just say that her hair here. And highlights for the wall here. And my blacks are still a little bit too blue. So I'm going to take my shadow and this puck, and I'm going to drag away from blue. And you can see that the bottom of the RGB parade is responding accordingly. So I'm going to make sure that towards the bottom, the red, green, and blue are relatively in line there. Now I'm going to switch to the vector scope. And I think that maybe we could use a little bit of warming up along the flesh tone line. So I'm going to take my midtone and drag up. You can see that she's looking a little bit healthier there, which is nice. And then I'm going to come down to saturation, bump up my master saturation a bit. And then I'm going to come in with shadows and midtones until I'm liking the way that she looks. So again, she's looking a lot better. She was really washed out, very pale, and now she has a nice healthy glow. Let's take a look at before and after. Before and after. So as you can see, color correcting an image is very powerful and a very essential part of the process. And by using the 3-way color corrector, as well as the built-in video scopes, you can get the job done quickly and efficiently.